So, welcome to week 2 of our study of Jill Duffield's book, Advent in Plain Sight, a study or a devotion through 10 objects. And last week's object was gates. This week's object is tears, which may sound like it's depressing, but it's not. Tears have a lot of functions in Scripture. And sometimes, yes, it is lament, it is mourning. And that is part of everybody's life. It is part of our faith as well to understand where God is when we are in those places of mourning or despair. So I'm going to start us off with 2 verses from Psalm 80. Psalm 80 verses 4 and 5. O Lord, God of hosts, how long will you be angry with your people's prayers? You have fed them with the bread of tears and given them tears to drink in full measure. This is one that's a difficult one. This is a lament. This is the psalmist crying out, recognizing that they, as a people, have fallen short, that God is feeding them with the bread of tears. This is, of course, a very powerful description when you think about it, that this is tears to drink in full measure, tears in the bread they eat. Everything is sort of saturated with these tears, this understanding of lament. Jill writes, lament springs from the depths of our individual or collective pain, and we call out to a God we doubt listens or even exists, and yet cry out we do. So when we're in a season of lament, we have that doubt. And we don't like to admit that we have doubt. Nobody was like, oh yes, I doubted God, or I even doubted God existed. Where was God in this? How many times have we heard someone say this or said it ourselves in the midst of a crisis or midst of a very painful season of life to say, where is God? Where is God? So the psalmist is crying out in this sense of, how long are we going to be in this season, this painful season, when we feel like you aren't hearing us, you aren't listening to us? How long will you let someone suffer? And we can insert many. Oh yeah.
Just
George.
a quick comment.
Yeah.
When somebody went through Mother Teresa's journals or something, and she had periods of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad to hear that, because that makes me not feel like I'm weird.
Yeah.
I think that's just part of the Christian experience.
It's,
is that you struggle with that, and you just gotta keep slogging away.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because yes, Mother Teresa, who we lift up as the symbol of complete faithfulness, and she really was, but she struggled for not just a little while, for decades with darkness and doubt. But she continued to do what she felt she was called to do. So she felt a very strong calling on her life to serve the people in the slums and the streets who were in tremendous suffering. But she herself had her doubts, big doubts, where she felt like she was just completely in a place that was bereft of God's presence. So yes, even Mother Teresa, and I think that is a comfort, and I think it's a blessing that we have those records, those journals and recollections, because it does remind us that even the most faithful people can go through very dark, bleak seasons where it feels like you are nowhere near God, or God is nowhere near you. Either way, you feel like you've been abandoned.
Well, also in the Cherry's Screwtape Letters thing, C.S. Lewis at one point was talking about God. He goes, the enemy just, I can't phrase it as good as he does, the enemy will just let them go and let them suffer for a while and not talk to them. Mm-hmm. And somehow this strengthens them and stuff. It was really well said. I think it's the same kind of thing, that God kind of puts you through some dry periods sometimes.
Sometimes. But then eventually we ask, how long can we live on this diet? This diet of tears, this drink and this bread of tears. Jill, this is from Jill's writing. The psalmist talk of eating and drinking tears feels inappropriate or even disrespectful and rude. To say that this is how, in effect, the psalmist feels God is treating the people, that this is how they are being treated. However, the message of Advent is not one of superficial optimism, but rather one of tenacious hope. Jesus becomes incarnate not because the world overflows with peace, joy, kindness, patience, and justice. Jesus comes to earth in order to bring light to those who sit in deep darkness. I think we do often get caught up in that idea of Advent as this complete sense of just there's nothing but joy in the world, you know. And we know that's not true. Now, knowing that that is not true does not negate having hope for the future. I think we kind of go one extreme to the other sometimes. It's like, oh, suddenly from, you know, the last day of the liturgical calendar to the first day of Advent that the world suddenly became a much better place. It didn't. It's the same place. And if we were in a place of suffering before, we are still in a place of suffering most likely when that clock comes midnight. So to embrace a superficial optimism, to pretend that it's okay is I think, the real disrespect, is to not acknowledge that this is the season of your life. And I think that is where Jill is going with this, that this is what you feel, this is what you perceive. This is the season of a diet of tears for some. So to try and gloss over that is to be untrue, and in a way to be unfaithful, because you're denying your true self to God, either in your prayers or in your presence, and trying to pretend, oh well, it's the Christmas season or it's the Advent season, I should be happy. Right. God didn't come into the world. Jesus didn't become incarnate because the world overflows with peace, joy, kindness, patience, and justice. If it did, we would not have the incarnation. The very reason we need, poor Tim has been called to action. The very reason we needed God incarnate was because we were so broken and so lacking in every one of these areas. So Jesus does come to bring light to those who are in a place of darkness and suffering. The birth of Jesus, the colliding of the mystery of divinity with the finitude of humanity, means that nothing, no feeling, no experience, no question, no doubt, no pain are off limits to God's redemptive power and saving grace. Jesus himself knows the diet of tear-filled bread and water. His mother Mary does too. To think about the fact that, yes, in his humanity, Christ is well acquainted with suffering. He sees it, he feels it, he recognizes the depth of pain in people. He himself feels what we have felt in these places of deep suffering. And I like that Jill mentions his mother. I would also add Joseph. He gets overlooked, but I am sure Joseph understood this well too. This was his firstborn son. This is the miracle. I mean, there was plenty of tears in their lives as parents. There is a tear-filled life for a lot of time, and we can only imagine what after he was gone physically from the world, even though ascended in glory, your child is gone. The child you raised, the child you held is gone. That's still a time of grieving for them. We seldom think of that, I think. So, as we look at this first devotion, this first set of questions, does lament have a purpose, right? How does lament help us get through those times, those very difficult seasons?
It's like a mirror.
You're losing your class.
No, I'm not.
It's like a mirror.
I trust you.
Lament is like a mirror, I think. All of a sudden you see reality, I think, when you lament. Pardon me?
Good here.
I think lament is like a mirror where you really see reality. I think we live kind of in a fantasy world, and when you're lamenting, you are really dealing with life.
Right. I think that's a very good thing to think of. Lament, is looking at the situation we're in without filters. We look at what is happening around us and we experience the rawness of it. It is not polished up. It is not pretty. And that is what these deep cries are when we read laments in the Psalms, or of course in Lamentations, and plenty of places in the Bible where we hear the prophets lamenting, we hear the people lamenting. It is a very deep, real cry, sort of from the pit of your stomach. When you've been in a place that's so painful that you can't even talk. But it helps us to be in that moment, just to recognize it, and then hopefully to know that we really are not alone. It helps us get through, to recognize our pain is important, to get through it, to know that we are not alone. But that's part of what we are called to do for one another as well. Not only is God present with us, but we need to be present for one another, even if it's just to sit. You can't fix it, you can't make it better, but you can help someone get through that season until there is some relief that is felt. The other question she has for this section is, do you ever feel as if the weeks before Christmas in our culture make it difficult to express feelings of lament and sadness? Yeah.
Read the first part of that again.
Do you ever feel as if the weeks before Christmas in our culture make it difficult to express feelings of lament and sadness?
I think so. I mean, everyone expects you to be all holly jolly, during the Advent season, and sometimes
And
it's just
you,
not there.
Yeah.
you look around and it seems like everybody is happy, but I'm not.
Right.
And I'm supposed to be happy.
Right. The supposed to be, and look in comparison, and the sense that it's just you.
Yeah.
Right. I think that is one of the really unfortunate sides of our culture, because we do flip that switch really fast where everything is a Hallmark movie, and there'll be a moment of tension.
Just put on your happy face and go out.
But yeah, it's all going to be okay. And
I think our society is one that says we exist on this level. Hey, how are you? Fine.
right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
That's it. It's all over.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Don't say anything else. That's
Right. And then this time of year, it's how are you? And you're supposed to say, great.
Yeah.
You gotta amp it up. You can't just be fine. You gotta be great. Everything's rosy. You're not having any problems with your family or your in-laws, or you're not having any financial problems. You're not having any health crisis. No, all of that
Life is
suddenly.
just a big bowl of strawberries.
Right. It's perfect, right? Because nobody wants to be the downer in the crowd, right? To say, I'm in pain, I am suffering, I am grieving. Whatever your situation is, we kind of act like it doesn't exist during this season, and then you feel alone. And then you feel like it's just you. And you keep it to yourself. And lament helps us express that. Even if it's just screaming at the top of our lungs in our own home. If you need to do it, do it. I mean, that's the thing. God does not judge us for feeling pain. I mean, to call out to God in the midst of our pain is part of the healing process. To know that God does hear us and does know our suffering and laments with us. All right. There was quite a few of these. We're very good. But for time's sake, I'm going to jump a bit. All right. I'm going to jump to the Wednesday Devotional. This is from Psalm 126, and it's verses 5 and 6. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. So
That's uplifting.
this is uplifting, but it starts out with those who sow in tears. It acknowledges that there was a season of this diet of tears, right, that we just had, that we just talked about. But there is something on the other side of those tears. Sowing those tears, reaping shouts of joy. I'm going to read a fair amount of this one because it's kind of hard to summarize. Jill writes, "The psalm is one of hard-won praise, not a sentimental or superficial good feeling, but words of gratitude to God that spring from places of deep pain and sorrow." Again, reminding us that I think as Linda has pointed out, we like to kind of glide along in that mid-range where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, everything's okay, right? Life is okay. But this psalm acknowledges that there are these seasons of being uplifted even after you've been so low, that you will have, and it's, notice that it's not just words of joy, it's not just, oh, I'm happier now, it's shouts of joy. It's this joy that comes in and fills and overwhelms. So it is more than just a superficial understanding of both the sorrow and the gratitude. It is a transformational kind of thing. So have any of you read or seen the movie A Gentleman in Moscow? The book? Okay, we've got one. Okay, so that's why I'm going to read this whole section, because it helps if you haven't read it, it'll still make sense. So, this is a novel by Amor Towles. I don't know how to pronounce the first name. I'm going to go with Amor Towles. In which the main character, who is Count Rostov, is under house arrest at a luxury hotel after the Russian Revolution. He talks about being a member of the Confederacy of the Humbled. The Count, a waiter, he now is a waiter in the very place he was once served. So he is at this hotel, a luxury hotel, and now he's waiting on other people, where he was once the one who came in and was served and fawned over. And this is a paragraph from the book. "Having fallen suddenly from grace, those in the Confederacy," remember the Confederacy of the Humbled, "share a certain perspective, knowing beauty, influence, fame, and privilege to be borrowed rather than bestowed. They are not easily impressed. They are not quick to envy or take offense. They certainly do not scour the papers in search of their own names. They remain committed to living among their peers, but they greet adulation with caution, ambition with sympathy, and condescension with an inward smile. Their praise grows rich with knowing what it means to live in the shadow of the valley of death for unknown lengths of time. Their tears have sown their shouts of joy. Their sense of themselves and the world reflects a perspective tempered with the truth of our human finitude and fragility." So the idea of someone who had everything, privilege, influence, maybe even beauty, fell and is now part of this Confederacy of the Humbled. And recognizing in that tremendous fall where they are now and where they find their joy. It is not in being envious of others. It is not in fame. They don't search the papers for their own names. They have sympathy. They are not easily offended. They are changed. They are transformed. Within the fall, within that period for them was very great sorrow, they have now learned to reap the joy. The sense of themselves has changed. And she talks about how Jesus seeks out those who have been through such seasons of tears and sorrow. He says, she writes, "Those humbled by circumstances, some out of their control, and some of their own making, provide soil fertilized by tears and subsequently ripe for receiving the seeds of the gospel that brings forth shouts of relieved, resurrected joy. So again, not a superficial joy either.
What page is that?
41. Yeah. Those humbled by circumstances, some out of their own control and some of their own making. That is where the soil is being set. The soil is amended by the tears. But that is what makes it right to receive the blessing, right to receive the gospel message, to understand it. Because in that previous place, particularly in our example from the book, you're not receiving the gospel message. You don't need it, right? Why would you want it? You have everything. What has Jesus got for you, right? And we see this throughout the Bible, throughout Scripture. And just from my own, I remember this so clearly because my church, my small church in Charlotte, was in a very nice neighborhood. It was being flipped constantly. It was an old neighborhood with sort of small houses, and they were being sold or bought up in just every week, literally every week. Another house was gone, and these huge houses that were kind of in the same style but were 3-4 times as big would appear on these lots. And these families would move in, and they're nice people and nothing against them, but they wouldn't come to church. We tried everything because it was literally in the middle of a neighborhood where the church was. Everything around it was residential. And so the secretary at the time, we had tried all sorts of things, and she said she went out for a walk at lunch, and she would like to pray over the streets, the houses. And she came back and we were talking, and she said, I think the problem is they don't need anything.
Mm.
They don't think they need anything, I think is what she actually said. And I really think she hit the nail on the head. Is that, what do we offer from their perspective, right? What are we offering? They have beautiful homes, healthy children, good jobs, social lives. What are we going to give them that they need, right? They don't perceive a need.
Down the hill.
Yeah, it's one of those things where oftentimes until a crisis comes, there is no perceived need. It's rare the person who recognizes the deep need in the midst of that period of life where things are all going well and everybody's healthy, and it's hard to get through to someone who really has everything they need. It's hard to tell them that something's missing until they recognize it for themselves. And I think that is kind of the way that mirror works as well, that you suddenly recognize for yourself that there is something missing. Now, whether it's because of a crisis or whether it's just a slow understanding that this isn't all there is, that these things of the world are not the be-all, end-all, and there has to be more, and they start seeking. But it's hard. And until, and this confederacy of the humbled is one way of looking at it, when you realize you're not the center of the world and that you can't provide everything you need for yourself or your family, because there are things only God can give, and there are ways to live that we don't fully understand until we have a relationship with God. So it's hard. It's hard when you are trying to talk with someone who is in that place of everything is okay as far as they are concerned, and you just don't have anything for them. So I think that's one of the big challenges for us right now in our culture, and just depending on where you are and located in the world as far as the church goes, whether the population around you receives this message that you have as something of importance, or whether it just glides on by as, I might go if they have a nice music concert or something, I might go if they have a speaker I want to hear. But otherwise, we're not offering anything. So I just bring that devotion to you because at this time of year, I think that's also such a very important one, because there might be people visiting with us this time of year who have not been in a church for any reason for a year or more, probably more considering COVID. How do we speak to those visitors? How do we speak to those people who might just be coming because it's Christmas and you're supposed to go, right? How do we speak to them? How do we convey that this is more than just nice music and pretty words, that there's something deeply needed here? Just something to think about. No pressure. No pressure. All right, we're gonna do at least one more. I'm gonna do one more, and then I need to help our Advent folks get prepared for lighting their wreath. This is from her Thursday devotional, and the passage is one of my favorite stories in Luke. It's Luke 7, it's just verse 38, but you'll recognize the story. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with the ointment. This is the uncontrollable tears that we have sometimes. And I like that Jill, I'm going to read this because, and Jill is a friend of mine, so I always like to hear some of the things she writes. So I'm like, yeah. She writes, "What possessed her, the woman who came to the dinner, to seek out Jesus at a well-known Pharisee's home, no less, and make a public spectacle of herself? The writer of Luke's gospel reveals only that she is a sinner. The Pharisee, repulsed by this display, scandalized by her impropriety, thinks Jesus ought to know what kind of woman she is and put an end to her disruption of their nice dinner party. I resonate all too well with the Pharisees' discomfort at this woman's unchecked emotional outburst. I get uncomfortable just reading this story. I do not so much want to send the woman away as take her aside and whisper, 'This is not the time nor the place. Perhaps you could talk to Jesus privately later.' I cringe at her lack of control and unself-consciousness." So I read this as Jill being forthright. Yeah, what about someone's public display of emotion makes us so uncomfortable? What is it? I'm kind of asking, what is it? Why does it make us so uncomfortable?
That's a good question. It does make me uncomfortable.
Because we're afraid we might do that sometime ourselves, and we certainly don't want to be in that position.
Okay, so we don't.
So we feel for them because it makes us uncomfortable because, oh my gosh, I could do the same thing.
Okay, so we at one moment we sympathize or empathize even, because we're like, oh, that could be me, you know. But then we're like want to distance ourselves from it at the same time.
Exactly.
It's like, I understand, but I don't want to be associated with
Let's
that.
stop it.
Yeah, please stop, right?
I think it gives us a feeling of helplessness, that we can't help that person stop that the problem they're having that's
Right.
so emotional to them that they
Right.
can't control it.
Okay.
I think that's part of why I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, we can't help them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we may not have any idea what the source of their pain is. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what to do for them. Yeah, we feel helpless. That's another really good way to think about that. You know, we're kind of embarrassed for them, but we're also worried that we would be doing
can't
it.
help.
Is it contagious?
Yeah, because I'll tell you, I tell people no one cries alone in my presence, because if you start crying, I'm gonna cry with you. I will cry with you. I'm a sympathetic crier. I have learned to accept this in my ministry. One of my friends actually called it a ministry of tears because I'm like, you know what? There are times when I can certainly manage it, but there are times when, what is the point of restraining those tears?
You do well. We had this conversation before
Yeah.
you got hired.
I mean, there are times because you know other people may also, it may be a domino effect, right? It may well send everybody down that path. And you don't want that. But there are other times, usually more private times, you know, then why restrain your own feelings of empathy and alignment with someone who is suffering? To cry with them, just to sit with them and let the tears go. It's sometimes hard to do because it also makes us very vulnerable.
Yeah.
This woman makes herself incredibly vulnerable, not only just by showing up at this Pharisee's house, knowing she is absolutely not welcome.
But by her actions.
Right. I mean, just showing up was bold. I mean, bold. And the fact that she came all the way in, and it was probably the shock of her raw emotions that kept her from being thrown out immediately, because now everybody is in this sort of stunned embarrassment, right? Everybody's just like, what are we gonna do? And the only one who is seemingly not going to be overwhelmed because he understands the emotion is Jesus, who simply accepts this woman as she is and where she is, and the true feeling that is coming, literally pouring out of her, pouring out with the tears, pouring out with the ointment of perfume that she's pouring out, using her own hair. I mean, these are really huge, vulnerable moments in this woman's life. And you can only imagine if you were a guest how Peter's like, you know, just looking at each other like, what are we supposed to do? You know, and the Pharisee, remember, he's not even saying anything for a while either. He's sort of in this stunned silence. He's thinking it. We hear what he's thinking. Doesn't he know who this woman is? How is he allowing any of this to happen? You know, he should tell her to leave. He's thinking this because he can't even say anything. He's just like, you know, I can just picture him with his mouth open going, you know, what has happened at my dinner party?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this a place that we all protect ourselves from going to? That
Often.
we all know that we could get to that point, but we won't let ourselves do that, especially in front of other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have, think of all the phrases, and Jill has this also referenced. Never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
Never, you know, just, what is it, keep calm and carry on. There's another one. You might look unprofessional, particularly in a work situation. You know, buck up, you know, soldier on. Don't make a scene. Now, I think that one, she writes that one. That's generally the one I think our parents are, don't make a scene. Now, usually it's because you're acting up as a child.
You're having a temper tantrum.
You're fussing, you're just having a little fit.
We'll get our
Don't make a scene. But that applies as you get older too. Don't make a scene. There is an episode, this is random, it popped in my head, an episode of Frasier where, I hope you know Frasier, but the brother Niles is at a party with his fiancée, Mel, and there's some big misunderstanding, but they're at this Christmas party. And he's like, okay, we can leave. You know, she's very sad. She says, no, we're not gonna leave. Put on your party face. And so they literally, that's what they do. So they're in this huge disagreement, but it's like, they're walking around with the party face on because they don't want, she's like, don't embarrass me, she says.
Right.
Don't embarrass me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, party face.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, party face, party face. And so they're walking around with this stupid, you know, fake grins on their face. Instead of actually dealing, you know, instead of appropriately dealing with the situation. But yeah, Jesus isn't affected in that way. His response is totally different, right? In fact, this is what Jill writes. Nothing, no one can prevent this woman's total embodied response to the person and grace of the incarnate Messiah. And Jesus tells the Pharisee and all of us, appalled at her person and her behavior, that her tears and her touch, her weeping and her outpouring of precious ointment, Jesus tells her it is absolutely appropriate, right, and good. Her uncontrollable, over-the-top reaction to Jesus ought to be ours too. That's what Jesus says to all of these gap-mouthed people sitting around this table going, somebody make her stop. And he's saying no. What she's doing is completely appropriate. And you don't see that. She sees what you don't. Her response is the right one. So it's just such a fascinating turn, because we can, I think all of us can put ourselves at that party and we know how we would feel. And I don't think one of us would go, oh, look how amazing this woman is. And we'd just all be like, when is this gonna stop? Make it stop. So there are things, and Jill talks about, she gives an example of a time when she was at a church meeting that didn't go well, and she was very hurt by something in the meeting. She's a pastor, obviously, but she couldn't contain her emotions. She let them. See, I was about to say, let them get the best of her. See, we're trained to think this way. I said it. And so she was all embarrassed, and she said made her look weak, and she's in a position of authority. And she was talking to someone that she trusted, very wise person in the church, who said to her, she told me that my response in that meeting perhaps revealed the importance of the issue before us. Some things, she said, are worth crying about. And how will others know their importance if we refuse to be moved by them? I don't know who this woman was, but those are some wise words. How will others know their importance if we refuse to be moved by them? Yeah. It's important. Something that is truly important to you, maybe it is a particular cause, maybe it is a more personal situation, maybe it's just the depth of emotion. You are overwhelmed in worship by some movement of the Spirit within you, and you cannot stop yourself. Some things are worth crying about. How will others know their importance if we refuse to be moved by them? I think that is so important.
How do we fight back tears?
I think we've been told to. I think we've been given the idea that it is weak or unprofessional. It's not manly, right? We have that. We also have the gender discrepancy. It's a little more acceptable for a woman to be moved to tears.
But then the woman gets labeled as just that emotion of a
Right,
woman.
she's driven by emotion.
But
so.
men are not supposed to be.
Right, so we also have a gender dichotomy because of, she's soft-hearted, and it may be accepted, but now she's not a leader, right? Because she's weak. Yeah. And if a man cries, oh, you're right, oh, no, there's talk about people not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
If a man starts crying, everybody is just it's just stunned silence. It's someone take him out of the room and whatever.
Let's go talk somewhere.
We're so ill-equipped. I think that's really what it is. We're ill-equipped to be in the presence of raw vulnerability, because that's really very, very vulnerable. Just like this woman, completely vulnerable in front of total strangers, and not.
Just this morning, Mom sent me emailed me a video that made me cry. So I showed it to my wife, and I stood in the back so she couldn't see me cry again.
Yeah. Right.
Why do I need to feel the need to express that
Right.
from my own wife? That doesn't make sense.
So never let them see you sweat. Never let them see you cry. Right. And that is such a disservice to our human nature, because how do we know how important something is to someone unless we see their emotional attachment response, the tears, the maybe anger. I mean, it could be a different emotional response, but how do we know unless we are witness to that moment of being moved to such a raw and vulnerable place? We don't know. And we may continue to hurt that person again and again by not knowing. I mean, we're not doing it intentionally, but we're still doing it because we have no idea how important that is to someone. I think of children because sometimes, something is so important to a child, and it really, truly is. I mean, it is. There's no denying from their little world, from their perspective, it is everything. And we're often quite dismissive of that. Oh, honey, you don't need that. Oh, this isn't, just because we can't go now, we're very dismissive sometimes of that. And children don't hide their emotions very well, right? Children are generally going, unless they have been conditioned to hide their emotions, they don't. They're gonna tell you, and then our reaction is like, and we kind of tamp down what that means to them. Well, then we do it as adults too. We kind of tamp it down so it's manageable. We like to make things manageable. A little emotion is okay. A lot of emotion, we just are flummoxed. What do we do with that? I don't know what to do with that.
And should we be envious of that woman?
I would be.
That she is in the presence of the greatest power.
And she
on our earth.
knows it.
And she realizes it. And everybody else is saying, yeah, it's not a big deal. Why is she acting that way? No, we should be envious. We should be
I mean, of
reacting
all
the
the
same way.
people in the Bible, this woman is like, I know who you are, and falls at his feet in tears and wipes his feet with her hair. Yeah, this woman had an experience of,
She gets it.
she gets it. Yes, he's a man before her, a flesh and blood man, but he is her savior. Literally her savior. In every way.
And he hasn't
she
even
gets
been
it.
to the cross.
No, she gets it. And of course this story is sometimes referred to as a precursor to the cross, to the recognition that others will have. But can you imagine getting it? How could you not react this way?
No, and she certainly didn't give any thought to her emotions.
No,
They
she is
just were there.
overwhelmed with this. Here is someone who loves, accepts, forgives her. And he's right there in her town at some Pharisee's house. Who cares it's a Pharisee? She is going to go no matter what and show him how she feels. I mean, yeah, we should all be envious of this woman. Yeah.
I once read a book, this little kid whose dad was a pastor, and he said he used to pray for God to beam him power when he was preaching. So when I see somebody struggling like that, I can't
Yeah.
watch because I will it's contagious.
Yeah.
And I just put my head down and pray for God to beam them power.
There you go.
They'll get
Well,
through
that's
it.
a good prayer. Yeah, we get embarrassed for
Yeah.
other people. And sometimes you have to let someone kind of struggle through something, even though it makes us uncomfortable. Again, it's our issue, not theirs. It's our issue in response to this sort of outpouring. But yeah, I think, and I'll end on that. I do think she is the one to be envied, even possibly more so than the disciples, because she seems to understand something
Oh, yeah, they were.
with absolute certainty. There's no doubt in this response.
How glorious your Leslie was.
The disciples didn't catch on until after he was gone.
Yeah, and can you imagine? They spent days and nights and months and years with him, and still, we have not a single story of any of them falling at his feet, weeping uncontrollably. So, yeah, I love that. That's why I wanted to make sure we got to that one. I love that story. It is, for me, a very powerful story. And yeah, she gets it. And we are uncomfortable with her getting it. So something to ponder through the next season, next few weeks, and really always. But how and why do we control our emotions? I mean, there may be times when we say, oh, well, it wasn't the right time or place. But there are other times where it's like, why not? Why didn't I just let my emotions show? It's hard for us, and I think it does take practice, in a sense, of letting ourselves do it. Letting ourselves be seen as vulnerable people who can be hurt. We don't like to acknowledge that, but we all are. We are all vulnerable. So anyway, it is a message of hope and joy, because this woman is weeping with joy. She is not weeping in sadness. She is not weeping.
I think it's both.
Yeah, she is.
Great joy and great sadness.
Yeah, they're close together. Yeah, but she is just showing everything. All of her cards are on the table. Nothing is held back. So embracing who Jesus is. So maybe we'll try to embrace who Jesus is a little more, particularly as we're in this season of reflection and anticipation. Thank you all for joining me today. I do.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here on a holiday weekend, and thank you for everyone who might watch later online.
Very good.